So you live your life and no one remembers you. You know, if I set my ego aside, it's okay. If no one remembers me, if the world forgets me, it's fine because I have myself. And as long as I experience those things, it belongs to me. But what if I'm standing in a white room after my life and I don't know who I am, I don't remember anything, what remains within me? There's this one ending from Miyazaki's film Spirited Away that I really hated for the longest of time. I just could not get over it. Spoiler alert, it's revealed that Chihiro does not remember anything that's happened within the film. It infuriated me. It was like one of those endings where the writer would be like, oh, it was just all a dream in the end, and you're thinking, then what was the whole point of the story? And I feel like as an adult, I now understand why, maybe why. I'm a slave to sentiments and nostalgia. I love to commemorate things and remember things and collect souvenirs of all parts of my life. I had to stop scrapbooking for my own good. But I think it's also because I have goldfish memory and I just cannot remember anything for my own good. And I feel like as you reach an older age and you have more things to remember, the brain does not have any form of capacity to be able to support all these files of memories in such vivid, clear significance. And so as I grow older, my childhood is more and more foggier as it was 10 years ago when I was still in my childhood. I feel like the same applies to my books. When I look at my childhood, I think of them as merged between the actual memories that I have from my childhood and the worlds that I lived in through books, characters that I knew, places that I saw, experiences that I went through, and I feel like they are just a kaleidoscope of different colors that just all interweave together to form this one identity. In a way, I don't remember the exact plot or the character names, but I do distinctively remember the impressions that it leave me. The same way that dreams, wake up from a dream, you can't remember the substance of the dream's plotline, but you can remember the distinct impression of that released catharsis or grief from that dream. I think that's just the whole point of living. You just go through stories, just the motion of stories, you experience them, you feel them, and you embody them, and then you forget about them. But then a part of you just tweaks just slightly inside. And in the same way, I think maybe Chihiro will forget about those things, but it may all be just buried somewhere in her head. It has also shaped her soul. I can't imagine my life without reading. Again, I cannot recall half the plot of these books, if I have to be honest. I feel like they are books that haunt my narratives. It's almost like there is something that just haunts behind the back of my head, the back of my soul, the back of my tongue, whatever. And it's something that has changed the way that I see the world and the way I find myself going to myself. And it's not necessarily about like referring to moral lessons or some form of big thematic change in my life, but rather seeing the world through these writers' perspectives and through their lens, and seeing how I can alter my own, not reality, but I suppose the way that I conceive the notion of certain things in my life accordingly to these books that I have gathered over the last 10 years. So, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope you are too, but I don't know what I'm doing. So if you know what I'm doing, please give me a clue and let me know what sort of YouTube videos that you would like to watch from me. Got a lot of requests, but I've been trying to scrape corners of my brain to try to figure out what to make. I simply don't know, so here I am. Perhaps you'll find a piece of yourself in here, the way that I have found a piece of myself in here. I cannot start off this list without mentioning the woman that I feel like everybody hates these days for some reason, but I feel like I owe my great sense of sense. You know, like you have a soft spot for your first love because they're the ones who taught you how to love. I feel like that's the same case with Sylvia Plath. Her journals, her poetry, her letters, and just everything that she has touched and linguistically just created just makes my heart flutter. I read Sylvia Plath for the first time when I was 16, and I felt like my whole life changed because I talked about this before, but when you're 16, all you want to have is to feel like you're being heard. My first love was with reading, in which I felt like I was being heard for the first time. It's one thing to love a book, but it's another thing when a book loves you back. And I felt like that was the first experience that I have ever had with a book, with the bell jar. And it kind of feels like a time travel portal. Because this book is also heavily annotated with the moments in my lives in which I revisit them, I feel like there are small portals to a version of myself that I thought I have lost. It's almost kind of like when you put on a perfume for the first time and you're whisked back to summer 2018. You're in love for the first time and everything feels like a Lorde song. That emotions that you have, you thought that were gone, just all come back to you and just consume you, and you feel like change is not a real thing. Everything is just hidden behind layers of things that you just added to yourself. But then I feel like it's the same case with the bell jar, and I think it's nice that I have a book that acts as that portal to myself. I also do think that I would have hated this book if I have read it for the first time as an adult. I also love how you can see the world of Sylvia Plath within this book. I love her poetry as well, and I feel like a lot of the things that she writes, you can see where everything kind of connects with each other. There's like a small wire of small references to her poetry and themes, because I feel like she talks about the same things over and over again in different contexts. I feel like once you start to immerse yourself into that language of what goes around in Sylvia Plath's head, it's almost kind of like you're like immersed into her own reality, and no one knows what her reality was. But I feel like it's such a weird thing because she and I did not intersect within timeline, but I feel like I have the craziest parasocial relationship with her. It's weird because if you think about it, how could Sylvia Plath imagine that someone would read her works 100 years later, and I'm very bad at math, and feel the exact same way and feel just slightly better, you know? I think that's the whole point of art. Sylvia Plath makes me wonder about a lot of things, especially from the light of being mythologized. John Green once said something similar, where he said that Alaska, from his book, was a character in his head for a very long time, but the moment that he published it, she was not his. She belonged to the readers. And I feel like it's almost impossible to belong yourself in this world, and you just have to be constantly giving, and the question is, what are you going to be giving? Sylvia Plath herself gave me a lot of things, and I think about the fig tree so often. There's a lot of things that I love about the bell jar, but I do have to make an honorable mention to Frieda Hughes's poetry, My Mother, that she wrote for the BBC film adaptation with Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know what they requested for her specifically, but she wrote the poetry in response. Essentially, it talks about the Sylvia doll and how people are so prone to mythologizing these real figures and for their own entertainment. I found that very interesting because she talks about peanut eaters. In the first paragraph of the book, Esther talks about the years the Rosenbergs were electrocuted, and she mentions the peanut smelling mouth of every subway, which I thought was very interesting. And you can kind of see that reference all along through her entire book. There's this one reference to her poetry, The Morning Song, in which she talks about a baby. I feel like once you start to read a book and you get very acquainted with the mind of the published works of a certain figure, you start to like create a secret language and build a certain intimacy with this writer, which Sylvia Plath, I think, would be my lifelong partner in that sense. The same conversation of light. I don't know why I have 2 copies of this. I hope my mother does not see this book, because this testifies to my reckless finance spending era in my life. With Clarice Lispector and Sylvia Plath, they both talk about the same thing on hand, which is about mortality and the self, but then they talk about those in very different styles and different contexts. I think Clarice Lispector is more metaphorical and she's more detached from herself, which makes her more vulnerable in that sense. I have never intersected timelines with Clarice Lispector too, but I feel like she is like me, you know like that Joker meme? Clarice Lispector is me. And I feel like so many people can say the same thing, because Clarice Lispector talks about the most honest accounts of human experiences as a woman, or as just a human in general, and what it means to be experiencing yourself from different contexts of time and limitations and consciousness. What does it really mean to be myself? She's a woman that I really wonder what sort of person she was like in real life, because you can see so many glimpses of herself within these books, but then you never actually read about who she is as a person, despite the personality records or whatnot. You really wonder if she was in some form of divine contact with some form of great cosmic understanding of the world. She is like a portal to understanding the self. I think good art is when it is a mirror, it's not to society but to the self, not in the way that it's so ambiguous that you can find any form of projections, but then it forces you to see yourself through certain angles that you didn't know were just there. I really love A Breath of Life, which is the first work that I've read by her, which is, I think, one of my favorites, but it's essentially an account of a dialogue, dissertation essentially, where a creator and a creation is sort of sharing this conversation that's one-ended. The creation is talking and she's observing the things around her, and the creator is just watching her and I suppose like experiencing himself from the perspective of her experiencing her. And it really makes you wonder from both the literal sense of the limitations that we have as human beings. I forgot where I got this from, but it's almost like a stag beetle that essentially has no consciousness is being watched by a human being and just being observed. But the stag beetle doesn't know because it just can't comprehend that. The same way that humans just lack a certain form of comprehension or whatnot because we're human beings, and so we see the limitations that Angela, the creation, hits the wall against, and so we can see ourselves from that. I think what's scary is that when you feel like you find a piece of yourself in someone else, you start to think that the work is done, and so you think that because this person articulated this so well for me, I know and I understand myself better. This satisfaction is going to give me the illusion that my work is done and I don't have to do anything. I feel like it's the same case with modern and contemporary content age, where we search for meaning and we like to diagnose ourselves with psychological or spiritual disorders because we can be explained through this. We can just understand ourselves better, and there's nothing else we could do. When I read Clarice Lispector, when I read a really good book, I feel like my work is done. I just underline all the pages and think, what a great line. I see myself in it. I'm gonna stop thinking about it. I'm gonna forget it in 5 minutes. And there are times when I think that Clarice Lispector is just like myself in my past life, because she thinks in the same principle of time and just reasoning and different patterns of thinking. And so I start to wonder, like, was she me in my previous life, and are the things that revolved around her the things that remain in me now? Such a silly thought. It makes you really wonder, like, what sort of manifestation do you harbor as a person, contextualized by the people around you, or like the things that you're influenced by? This is so out of topic, but it makes me think of Sansa Stark from Game of Thrones. She's a Stark. She grew up in the House of Stark, but she also grew up with the influence of Littlefinger and Cersei, and so she had both of those worlds, and it was a matter of trying to find her identity within it. And I feel like in the same case, we have art, the things that we surround ourselves with, and we have the people around us, like schools and work and family and friends, things that we could choose but not necessarily really fight against. And so those things merge and then we find ourselves with it, which I think is pretty cool. The next book that I want to talk about is a copy that I don't have, which makes me so sad, but it is, I suppose, one of the books that I first fell in love with as a literature book, which is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And I love Leo Tolstoy so much. One of my favorite short story is by Leo Tolstoy, What Men Live By. And I feel like that single-handedly changed the way I see the world. It's my mom's favorite as well, but we reference that book so often, and I feel like it's a good short story to live by, and it makes you really realize the limitations of man and just the idea of living, because everybody is dead, which makes me sound like a horrible thing to say, but then when these people were alive, they thought that they were at the top of the world. Now that this world belongs to us now, we think we're at the top of the world, but it will be someone else's world tomorrow. But that is not to say that narratives will always stay. And I think with Anna Karenina, it was one of those books where I realized that classic literature is really not that daunting. And it makes me feel like I could swallow War and Peace. Like, it's not a retirement plan anymore. But I also do have to mention that I fell in love with Anna Karenina because I had a good support and guidance. If it weren't for my high school English teacher, I would not have touched that book. Like, nah. The structures of his lectures were just him yapping, literally quite yapping. Like he was just like, we would just sit in class and just listen to me yap about the book. And just literally what I'm doing right now, just like talking about what he thought, and then he would ask about our opinions and he would expand on that. And it was a very Socratic sort of method, but then it was mostly just him yapping. But I had a very fun time listening to him yap. He was a computer science teacher too. I don't know why he was teaching English class. I owe my love for genuine, like serious literature because of him. Karenina is a book that you would think is so daunting to read, but genuinely one of the best classic literature to start with, in my opinion. It is so real, so human. You can like just twist the narrative of the entire story to fit the narrative of today, and it would just be a fresh story. I think it made me realize that stories are just stories in the end. If we were to write the story of our own life, it would just simply be a narrative, nothing else. In the same way, narratives are very important. The next one is a book that I actually read in the same English class, which was The Divine Comedy. I do not recommend this translation. I don't know why I have this translation, but this is the only one that I have with me currently. I was lucky again to have a form of guidance. I think if you have a good opportunity of support or guidance with literature, book clubs, whatever's, then just 100% go for it, because it's just part of the experience and you don't know what sort of crazy ideas that people interpret. That itself is half the fun. Divine Comedy is about Dante himself waking up in hell, and he goes through the emotions of hell. And yeah, I've explained the premise of this book so many times in my videos that I have lost all form of originality within it. I think if you really love stories and literature and just diving in, I like to call these project books. I think this is the perfect project books because you are diving into a whole different world that is both inside the literature and what was of the world. Like yesterday's world did not belong to us, it belonged to Dante. By trying to find what remains in yesterday's world, we can come to predict what is tomorrow's world, but tomorrow's world is not ours. So we have to live today's world to be able to make tomorrow's world better. Divine Comedy was written with a lot of context of politics and culture, religion, and all sort of worlds in Italy that Dante lived in. And once you read this work, you're reading almost like a love letter to human civilization, I feel like. It has the best worlds of philosophy, of sin, of what it means to be a human, what it means to live, but it also has just the best commentary of Dante's world and our world in reflection of it. I think as a reader, a lot of people think that I like every book, but the truth is I actually hate a lot of books. Not a picky reader, but I feel like sometimes I have to force myself to read. But then there are rare times in which I feel like I have returned to my 13-year-old state in which I could read a 500k fan fiction overnight on a school night. That thrill of a book waiting for you to be read, that is peak human experience in my opinion. Certain writers just speak to me so well. The way they think and the way they write and the way they see the world just align so well with how I want to be seen or how I want to look at the world. Franny and Zooey by J.D. Salinger, or anything that J.D. Salinger writes. Salinger writes in a way that he writes with such simplicity. It's like that one Einstein quote where he says, if you really know something, you can explain to a 3-year-old. It's not the quote, but I feel like the essence of something that belongs to you is when you return to the state of simplicity. Is that a Nietzsche thought? He believed that the final state of full metamorphosis was to return to the child state. And I feel like in that sense, true genius level is when you can write something so simple with so much meaning in those things, which I think Salinger does so brilliantly. The first scene of this novel is when a bunch of boys, or well-educated boys, are waiting for the train to arrive. He writes this scene in almost as a foreshadow of what's going to happen, but because the readers don't know what is going to happen or what the thematic weight for them is, he just writes in a sense that it's almost like a performance of just a random cinematic scenery playing out. And it's beautiful the way that he writes things and the way he captured this atmosphere. But then when you read it again, you realize that there were associations to what he was symbolizing and what he was alluding and what he was foreshadowing. There's almost like a hidden meaning for another reader, like a reader who has read his work. So Franny and Zooey is about Franny and Zooey. They belong to the Glass family, which I suppose is like the MCU of the Salinger world. That's my MCU. They are 6 or 7 siblings who were all geniuses growing up, and they were on this radio show. They were very smart. And so Franny and Zooey are the last 2 of those siblings. I always kind of like to see this book as like, what if the smartest person in the room can't figure out why the light bulb went out? And you start to panic, because if the flight attendant is panicking, then what the hell do I do? Franny, who is the youngest sister, the youngest sibling of the Glass family, has an existential crisis because she can't figure out what the deal is. Everyone is so performative, so shallow, so vapid, and absolutely nothing is saving her. No expedition of spiritualism or intellectualism is going to save her, and it's just a world where everything is virtually meaningless. Zooey, who's her older brother, is the funniest character in my opinion, tries to help her. They're so unlikable, but they're so lovable, and you just feel like they are just the experiences of what it means to be a human. You just cannot feel but not alone, despite the bleak messages. There are like a lot of siblings before Franny and Zooey, and it's an interesting case because they were all geniuses, but then they've all learned to live life, either by tolerating it or just succumbing to it. Buddy, who is alluded to be the narrator of this book, and he's like the second brother. I believe he was also the writer of The Catcher in the Rye. He talks about how he wanted Franny and Zooey to find their light before they find the world. Zooey, who's the older brother, he's already gone through it. He's gone through the same thing. It's alluded that the entire siblings went through the exact same things that Franny did. It's just a matter of time in which Franny would go through that thing. In our life, we go through a point in our life where we have to come in terms with reality as it is and who we are as human beings. The only thing that we could do is to learn from what was there before, but we cannot copy and paste those things. We have to find our own reasonings. Even though we go through the same things, everyone's answers are very different. And Zooey's answer was that you have to be kind, but he's a complete asshole. I also really do love A Perfect Day for Bananafish, which is about Seymour, who was the Seymour Glass, but who was the eldest brother of Franny and Zooey. When you're 16 and you read a book and you are just profoundly impressed because everything impresses you at 16, you chase that high for the rest of your life. I feel like I have a heart that is empty on one side, that is in the shape of that first experience in which I have read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Is it a romance book? Yes, it was when I was 16. It's like an experience that you have. You read about such diverse cast of characters in the way that they live life and the crazy things that they're willing to do. It feels like at such a young age, you've seen the world as it could be, and then you see people and you see reflections of the characters within them, and you see them from a different layer of understanding. Later on, because of this book, I was able to understand the power of narratives. I think as I age older, it's almost kind of like if I were a 16-year-old version of Mr. Lockwood, then I would have been so obsessed with how Catherine and Heathcliff's devotion to one another is so admirable, and it's something that I want to have for myself. But then I grow up and then I experience my own heartaches and the true reality of what it means to experience such things that are not good for you. You start to see the same stories that you heard growing up from a different light, and you see a version of yourself through that context and lens, and it's enlightening to realize that you do actually grow up. I think in a way, when you have access to a version of yourself that you're shameful for, you also develop a form of empathy for a bunch of young people. I really love Emily Bronte. I think it's just a fun theory that Wuthering Heights was based on herself. I don't know if it's true. A lot of people talk about having to travel the entire world and see and fall in love with all sorts of different people to write a good novel. But there are people like Emily Bronte who lived within the same premise of the same environment and perhaps the same routines, the same people. She died very young, yet She knew all these things. You don't have to be intimate with the world to write a book. You have to just be intimate with your thoughts. I only have this copy with me at the moment. This one is a copy of Dreams, which if you're a fan of dreams like I am, then you gotta pick this book up. I think it's the best book out there that is overall a good book about dreams. Carl Jung, where do I begin? He really detaches himself away from himself and any form of personal resentment or sentiment or fear that he has regarding who he is as like a human being, and just examining himself almost as if just consciousness is examining consciousness. And he's very honest and he's very careful. He's very detail oriented in my opinion. And I feel like he gives psychology such a good foundation to be able to be examined from. The question that I'm always hit on the road is, what good are you really doing for this world? Which reminds me of Schopenhauer's letters from his mom, which is so mean. If I received that letter from my own mother, I would probably cry and retire. But I feel like it's something that a lot of intellects have to hear, because people who are in that world of essentially wordplay, I like to call it wordplay in my opinion. I know it's such an irresponsible belief, but it's wordplay in my opinion. It's meaningful wordplay. You have to realize what you're doing, what you're contributing. But I feel like Carl Jung is someone who truly tries to make it as meaningful as he could and actually change people for the better. There's a quote by him where he says, again, I'm paraphrasing, you can study psychology all you want, but if you're going to talk to a human, talk to them as a human. I think in life you either create or you support, and in a way I think Carl Jung does both. Paradise Lost, I like to see it from the same angle as the Divine Comedy. Paradise Lost is a retelling of the story of Adam and Eve's fall, and essentially the idea is the Sunday school question of, if God knew that Adam and Eve would eat the apple, why did he create Adam and Eve? And with Paradise Lost, you can really love it for the prose, you can really love it for the story or the sneaky way of how a narrative could be twisted into a different narrative. But I think what's so beautiful is John Milton himself. I'm not a biographer, I wish I were, but John Milton he wanted to be on the shelves. He wanted to be on the shelves with Homer and Virgil. He didn't know what he was going to write about, and he ended up producing this great work. And I think it's a really brilliant testament as to ambition and how far belief could take you somewhere. Everything that Milton did in his life brought him to the moment of this creation. And it's crazy sometimes to think that I feel like I'm too late in my life to do anything meaningful. But I believe John Milton wrote this when he was in his 60s, and he had this dream since he was a young man. You really never know when your time is up, but you really never know when your time is also going there, but then you have to experience all those small, what you believe are tiny, irrelevant moments in life to be able to experience those, to make it yours, to be able to produce such great works like this. Next book, Plato. Just kidding, St. Augustine. St. Augustine, I think this guy, oh my goodness, I said this about just about everyone here, but he changed my life. I am a mosaic of everything that I have read and loved. So St. Augustine was a man who was the epitome of a playboy, and he loved to indulge in all things that I suppose the male body could offer. But anyways, he was a playboy. He loved to live. He loved that part of life, and he knew that it wasn't good. And I believe his mother was a devout religious woman, and she was praying for him, and call it divine intervention or something. But he knew that he had to change his way of living. In the back it says, "Give me chastity and continence, but not yet." It makes you really think about divine postpone, or just postponing your life, and just seeing a different version of yourself in different contexts and knowing how you should change. But then once you get there, you really do lock in. Something that truly just like changed me, page 165, where he says, "For the rule of sin is the force of habit, by which the mind is swept along and held fast even against its will, yet deliberately because it fell into the habit of its own accord." Crazy, because you really think about what it means to be a human being and what it means to have a form of consciousness, free will, control over yourself, but no control over who you are as a person and how you operate. You think about the flesh, the mind, and the soul, and think, in which vicinity do I exist when they are all just in conversation with each other? I think one beautiful thing about St. Augustine is that he was also very much influenced by Plato. For him, there just wasn't a lot of studies done in theology, I suppose. In that way, the way that we see the world is very much infiltrated and colonized by religion, especially the Christian world. And the way that the Christian world is molded, a lot of its theology is based upon St. Augustine. But he was influenced by Plato, who was influenced by Socrates, but who was influenced by God knows who. I think it's so beautiful that every single thing, and the more that we live, the more that our generation comes to increase in size, the longer that our story becomes, the more in conversation that we are with our old selves and the people before us. And so really we're honoring human civilization as it is. Tenth-grity, I suppose. I forgot what the word is, but I think that's what makes reading so beautiful. If you're really burdened by the question of how is all these great intellects and great thinking, great word and essays and such politics of this world, how is it actually going to make real change? And I think it really starts from this father of existentialism, who is Soren Kierkegaard. I love this man. He just, yeah. He is just. I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with him, but I do believe that the premise is there, like the formula and the calculation of how one should live. It's the most fundamental question, which I believe was offered by either Aristotle or Socrates, was how are you going to live your life? The fundamental idea that I personally resonate with is this idea of personal responsibility and faith. There's a lot that I have to work with Kierkegaard still, I believe. I understand him the best that I could from the context of my own thematic life. I think one of the beautiful things about reading is that you grew up with books. I want to finish this list with the book that I think I actually outgrew, which is crazy to say. Maybe it's because I've thought about this book for a very long time and I've talked about this book like a billion times. I owe just about everything, like the way that I think, the way I see the world, the way I choose to expand on the empathy that I have regarding other people, and the way that I just choose to see humans and life and free will specifically. It makes me so happy whenever people send me like comments or DMs saying that they've read this book because I talked about it so much, and I feel like that's my contribution, at least, by trying to talk about a book. Or at least that's my way of justifying it. But this book is a single book that I would recommend to everyone, reader or not. It is the book that I recommend. Wuthering by John Steinbeck. Haha, very unpredictable, but this book, I read it for the first time a couple of years ago. By sheer coincidence, I had no idea what this book was about. I got it on sale for like $3, and boy, did it change my life. I don't think it's really a matter of like enjoying the book or not, but more so experiencing what literature could accomplish and how you could take one narrative and expand on that from your own perspectives. I think this is what it means to help people from the angle of stories. I think stories are one of the greatest inheritance that we have, and I love Homer in that sense because I believe it's one of the greatest inheritance that we still have. But Wuthering, I believe, is also one great inheritance. He wrote it for his sons, but it's an inheritance to so many people in this world. Wuthering is about the retelling of Cain and Abel. So you can just see the story of Cain and Abel from different angles, I think. I think there is so much nuance and philosophical implications of human life within that one story. But the way that Steinbeck sees it is the idea of evil and inherited evil. If I'm evil, if that is what I'm meant to be, what is the whole point of fighting for my own fate? So Cal in the story is the evil one, and his brother Aaron is the nicer one. We see what it means to be on different sides of the coin, what it means to be more someone who responds to evil, like conventional evil, better than someone who chooses to turn a blind eye on it. And not necessarily about punishment, but it's more so about who you become when you choose to believe something. we all have a choice in the end. I think I'll actually make a video about this. I made a video about this that I'm very proud of actually. I think like if I were to leave one video on my TikTok channel, like only a single video, it would be the video that is here right now. But it just made me see things from a different light, especially when it comes to morality and what it means to live by that. But anyways, this is the beauty of reading. It's what it does to you in the sense that it could bring you so much fun, but also community and change people's life. And the whole point is to experience and think of the impressions that it leaves within you. I think in the same way, when Chihiro in Spirited Away forgets about everything, still that courage that she had, that she was forced to open up within her, remains in her. Does that make sense? I'm not gonna go into great depths to try to find a parallel to this to reading. But I think it's the same sentiment where we're left with certain impressions of stories, of how we find a road to ourselves and to not really find or build ourselves, but rather experience ourselves and to have faith in what we choose to believe in so we get to experience ourselves and subsequently everything around us better. Anyways, I love a good story. Can't imagine my life without stories. And a good book and a narrative. My idea of heaven is me locked up in a library with my cats. However, with a couch that is not covered in cat fur, and an espresso machine, and good sunlight, or rainy day, and the beach, and a good book. So many books, so little time, but the books that I have read, I believe I was meant to find. These are, I suppose, the closest that I could say is my fate, but